the CS curriculum lead.
You didn't pick out great music for me, Joe? Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Click twice and your name will come up really
Click
faint.
twice and I get some music?
Yeah, well, that's all you got.
Aw, Joe. All right, fine, I'll deal with it. Good morning, everybody. My name's Josh. That's me. If you've been with us for the last few years, I've been the guy that every year says, hey, we should do more talking about teaching and learning. And gradually, we've gotten more and more folks in this room to talk about teaching and learning. And I'm curious, it's kind of hard for me to see with the lights, but I'd love for folks to raise their hands if you, in some aspect of your role, work in instruction with a Blockly-based environment, whether that's designing, teaching. Yeah, keep those arms raised high. Look around. This is a far cry from the 3 hands I got a couple years ago when we first started bringing these folks into the room. So I am so excited to have you here so I can continue to talk to you about how we do more as a community in blocks-based teaching and learning. I'm going to spend a little bit of time actually talking before Blockly about where we've come from. How did we get to this point where we use blocks as an instructional resource for students? Things that I see in the conversations around teaching and learning right now, the kind of conversations that I constantly have with other folks who do instructional design in blocks. A little bit about where I think we're going, and then what I want us to do next to continue this conversation around blocks-based teaching and learning. So, we're going to situate ourselves by looking back just a little bit, and we're going to do a little bit of a quiz. Don't worry, low stakes, very few questions. I'm just curious to see how many of us recognize some of these precursor environments. So I'm going to throw up a screenshot. If you recognize it, shout out what you see. Don't be shy, just say, this is what I'm looking at. All right, we ready? Okay, close. There's some logo on that screen, but this is actually Boxer. This takes logo and says, how do we provide additional semantic context to students so that they know what to do with logo? So it creates this box environment, the name, Boxer, the metaphor, boxes, they nest, they sit next to each other. They give you semantic information about the relationships between elements in the system. So we're trying to find ways to give students more than just the language in order to help them develop a rich understanding of the system they're working with. All right, let's see if this next one gets more. I think we might get more with this one. If I said agent, would you say agent sheets? Thank you, agent sheets. So something that looks certainly more blocks-based. We've got things that drag around. Agent sheets, it is an agent-based programming model for simulations. Sheets, the metaphor is now spreadsheets. I'm picking ones because I like the names. They're very descriptive. All right, we'll do one more. Alice. I knew this was going to be the one that caught more folks. It's more recent. Alice. So now our metaphor is storytelling. Alice in Wonderland. Storytelling comes out of some early VR, actually. This was intended for programming VR experiences. But again, we can see there is some heritage in how we are communicating more than just the text of the language. We are trying to provide additional semantic content. All of these are interesting because they are trying to solve similar problems, but using different approaches. So they're all thinking about how do we lower barriers to the power of computing? How do we make it easier for students to engage with computing? They're all using some sort of visual spatial semantics. They're all trying to communicate more about what's going on to students. Now, obviously, there are some challenges with using visual spatial semantics for students who struggle with different elements of that. That's a challenge we're continuing to deal with today. But we're looking at ways in which we can give them more rich context. And the third is that they're all pragmatic environments. They actually make it easier for students to understand what could be done. If you sit a kid in front of a blank screen and say, it's got Python on it, do a thing. What happened to my slideshow? Pretty sure that's not my slide. Did that happen in the back? If you put a student in front of a screen and say, do a thing, how do you know what can be done? So all of these environments help students connect the dots between the code that they create and the kinds of things that they could make. I mention all of that because when we look at where we're at now, the questions that we ask, what it looks like to be in instructional design in the age of Blockly, it's very similar questions. We're asking how do we design these engaging, effective, accessible learning experiences, but we also have this opportunity to ask how do our design and engineering choices impact that? Because with Blockly, we actually have so much more control over what that environment looks like, and we share so many of these resources that we can learn from each other. So those questions that we looked at, we're still grappling with, right? We're still thinking, how do we lower barriers? How do we design blocks-based environments in ways that access students? We're still thinking about the visual spatial semantics and other metaphors, right? What are the metaphors for engagement that are gonna give students more information than they could have alone? And there's some interesting new questions about pragmatic environments. What is a pragmatic environment for an LLM? What kinds of things do we think students should be making, and how are we going to design environments that help guide them towards those? We have a lot of evergreen conversations in this community. I think all of these are represented pretty well in the next couple of days. We're always talking about blocks to text. Is it the right thing? When is it the right thing? How do you do it? We're always talking about how do you find that right level of abstraction. When you're designing blocks, how do you balance an abstract and easy to access version of a block versus a far more detailed but maybe more cumbersome, harder to grapple with version of the block. Where's Hal? Hal's going to be talking about horizontal grammars, which I think is a really interesting conversation we haven't been having enough of. We've found these new horizontal grammars that we're using in things like Scratch Junior with assumptions about what that means for students. When do you make those choices about a horizontal versus a vertical grammar, and what does that tell a student? What does that enable them to do? And of course, we're constantly talking about accessibility, whether that is from the engineering perspective or the student perspective. These are conversations this community needs to continue having. But when we think about what's next, that's where things get kind of weird. So I'm going to give you what is honestly a very half-baked metaphor, and I'm not sure I like it yet. So if you have opinions about this metaphor, come find me and tell me why it doesn't work. And I've actually changed it several times since I made this slide. But when I think about what Blockly is doing, I think about like a mountain of computing. And way back when, in order to access the power of computing, you have to climb all the way to the top of that mountain. And every time we make a new language at a different level of abstraction, we are carving a plateau into that mountain to say, if you could get here, now you can access some power of computing. And maybe you still want to go to the top. Maybe you want to learn assembly. But maybe halfway up that mountain's fine. And we keep gradually carving in new plateaus that make it a little easier. And Blockly has been really focused on how do we carve smaller steps, right? How do we make it easier to get up to a level of access to the power of computing that is meaningful for the folks that we're working with, whether that's a student or whether that's somebody in industry who like, I don't need to know assembly. I need to get up to the point where I can do what I need to do with computing. And what I wonder for the world of Blockly in the next 10 years is like, what if we didn't need these steps? What if we weren't about carving more plateaus, but finding a way to have a ramp that spirals up the mountain? This is where the metaphor starts to get a little bit stretched. But work with me, right? Like, what if instead of asking a student to leap up, we found ways to allow everybody to work the way up this mountain of computing that is meaningful to them, to reach the level that they need to reach, and that lets them continue up if they want to? And the reason I ask this is because we are in a moment where LLMs can generate a whole bunch of code for us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they can give students access to computational logic. Using LLM-generated code is like being flung up the side of that mountain, and then you grab on, and if you did not learn how to climb a mountain, you're kind of stuck. If anybody has vibe coded, even if you know what you're doing, you get flung up the mountain, and then you're like, uh-oh, I don't know if I can go up, I don't know if I can go down, I don't know where to go from here. And I wonder if this community, if the legacy of Blockly, as we think about the role that it plays in the future, helps to address this. Can Blockly provide access to computational logic that is accessible all the way up that ramp? Hopefully that is an interesting enough question to motivate you to join a Google group, because I made a Google group. Every year I've come back here and I said, man, I wish we talked more about this, and like, let's get more people here at the next summit. And we got so many more people here at the next summit. Let me get out of the way of the QR code. We got so many more people here, but once a year isn't enough. So I did the absolute bare minimum that one could do. I created a Google group and I posted a couple prompts in it. And I really hope that folks decide to use that space to have some of these conversations in an ongoing manner. If you are in Blockly-based instruction in any way, I hope that this is a place where you can find and build your community. If you are not, and you want a place where you can ask questions, I hope that this is a place where you can go. If you are an engineer and you're like, man, I really wish I could just bounce this idea off some people who are building curriculum, I hope that this is a place you can go for that. Set your expectations low. This is just a me thing. But if we all join, my hope would be this time next year, the talks that we have around Blockly-based teaching and learning are all informed by the great conversation.